Alright, here we are. So we're about to play this standard game against DrHack here. So I have not played a standard chess game. I've not played a chess game with a time control for 15 minutes for 8 months. I've pretty much played only Bullet since, I think, February. So it's very unclear how well this is going to go, but we're going to find out right now. Okay, so I've gotten white. And we are going to start off here. My goal is to not lose in the first 20 moves. And we're off. So yeah, I haven't played a tournament for I think about 10 months. I haven't played a standard game for 8 months. I'm not going to remember any opening repertoire, so I'm just going to do some kind of crappy London system or whatever I used to do. How does this work? Yeah, so shockingly, I somehow have a 2100 USDF rating. That will not be on display here in this game, just to warn anyone who's expecting quality play. So time control is 25 plus 10. The tournament games I'm used to playing 25 plus 5, so it's pretty similar. 25 plus 10 is the official FIDE rapid time control. Okay, my opponents have played e6. I could go c3, bishop f4. Let's go bishop f4. And then h3 to avoid the knight h5. Give myself a square to back up to. Should be able to remember the basics of this. What you usually see here is c5 or d5. You could also see d6 though, or bishop e7, any number of moves. My opponent's not going to be going for the g6 King's Indian type of setup because he's already played e6. So yeah, c5 is probably the most common move here that you would see. But d5 will just take you into a normal cut and dry London system. Let me just make a quick assessment of whether my recording is working here. I'm using OBS, which I usually use to stream. I've never used it to record. So hopefully this works. It'd be unfortunate if it didn't. Opponent is investing a lot of time here in the third move of the game. I don't know what he's thinking about. Maybe he's a little out of practice too. He's got a 2200 standard rating, 1960 Blitz, 1909 Bullet. So it's probably around my strength. My ratings are a little higher than that, but I am somewhat out of practice. I don't know what's going on here with my opponent. What he's thinking about. Spent what, two minutes on this move? Yeah, d5 is played. Okay, so we have this typical type of London. Getting notifications. So what am I considering here? h3 to avoid the knight h5 shenanigans. e3. Just go h3. Want to be able to back the bishop up. I can go e3 next move. The order doesn't really matter. Now that d5 has been played and we're in the typical type of London setup, I know h3 is going to be a necessary move, so it's not really risking anything to play it now. Expecting c5 from my opponent. That's what you would normally see here. c6 setup is possible, but very passive. There's no reason against an unambitious setup like this for white. There's no reason not to play c5, right? And that's what I would do here for black, even though I'm not an ambitious player by any stretch of the imagination. What can you do other than c5? You could play bishop d6 theoretically. On bishop d6, I'd probably go knight e5. I don't think bishop d6 is a very good move. Why would you? I don't know why you would play. I mean, you can always play that later if necessary, but you want to reserve the option of also going bishop e7. You never know what you're going to want to do. I think c5 is something you're going to be playing regardless, and you need c5 so you can get your knight to c6 if that's something you want to end up doing. So just that seems like the best option right now. Is there anything else? Stuff like knight h5 is completely useless now that I've played h3. That would just be a waste of a move or two. I don't really see any other options besides c5 or moving the bishop on f8. c5 seems like the obvious choice. As I said, c6, very passive. Sure what else there is to say about this position. I don't know why my opponent's taking so much time on these first few moves. Maybe I'm just unaccustomed to how much time you're supposed to take, and I'm the one taking too little, but just the first few moves of the game. Oh, I should say, the reason that this game is being played is because DrHack, my opponent, posted on the forum about wanting to do one of these joint video standard games where you both record commentary on the guest. So my opponent's gone for bishop e7. So I guess intending c5 next. That's certainly a valid option. So I think e3 now for me. Open the line for this bishop and prepare for a possible c4. After e3, I'm still flexible to go with either c3 or c4 setups. And stuff like a Kali system, I would have to play e3 first anyway, so I don't see a downside to e3. Also bolsters d4 when the c5 move inevitably comes. So yeah, my opponent's taking a lot of time, but I'm just going to keep looking out the moves again. What I was saying was to do one of these dual commentary standard games and post the results on YouTube. Now, I'm used to streaming, not posting on YouTube, so this will be the first thing I've ever posted on YouTube. And I guess if my opponent my opponent will also be releasing his video on YouTube, and I'll link to it in the description. I had a brief experience with YouTube. I think about 4 years back. It was a long time ago. I posted a few videos, and I then deleted them. And I started using Twitch at some point after that. And it's just more interactive, and you can direct contact with your viewers. Preferred that to releasing videos. Also got better software. I think I started out with YouTube videos recorded with absolutely terrible software. I don't even remember what I used, but it was not anything near as good as OBS. Anywhere near. Opponent again taking a lot of time. He's down to 19 and change. There is a 10-second increment, so it's not like anybody's going to be flagged here. Again, I'm expecting to see c5. I suppose castling is also a conservative option. Don't really see many others. Again, c6 is just a waste of a move. Knight d7 is possible, but I don't know that knight really wants to be on d7 rather than c6. It might want to be on d7. We'll see. So my opponent castles, so I could play c4 here. This is the first place where I have an interesting choice. I could play c4, I could play bishop d3. Those are the first moves that come to mind. Nothing else really does. c3 is too passive. Unless I'm going for a super slow Kali type of setup. If I play c4 now, it turns into kind of a race between the two of us about c4 versus c5. If I play c4 now, it makes it harder for my opponent. I'm not sure it actually goes that way. If my opponent plays c5 first, it makes it harder for me to play c4 since there's more pressure on my center, and I'm apt to end up with some kind of an isolated pawn or not enough pawns in the center. So I don't really want that to happen. So I think c4 now might be a good idea. My opponent could, of course, respond with c5. In which case I could take on c5 and then play bishop e2 and leave the tension. I could also play c3, bishop d3, knight d2, queen c2, and go for the e4 break. But again, c5 is coming. I'm not a big fan of that strategy either. And I'm not as familiar with the structures that arise from it. So I think c4, or I could play bishop d3. If bishop d3, c5 is the challenging move. In which case, you've got to avoid c4. I don't want c4 to be played in the black end, so I would take. But I'm not crazy about the position that you get there. And again, if I'm going to be playing c4, I want the option to have my bishop on e2 instead of d3. So I'm going to go with c4 instead of committing the bishop. Again, in these types of structures, the bishop probably wants to be on d3. D3 is a square where it has a lot of scope. It's the most useful, and then could be supported by a queen coming here. But again, there's scenarios in which you wouldn't want a queen coming there. For example, my opponent plays c5 right now, and the c file gets blown open. You don't really want your queen on c2 in that scenario. So I can foresee a situation where I would rather have bishop on e2, knight on c3, queen on b3, something like that. So obviously black should not take on c4 here, since that just gives me a free tempo developing my bishop for me. I think c6 again would be a very solid, but I think too passive option. c5, as for the last 3 moves, I think is probably the most challenging thing black could throw at me. On c5, I would be playing. I could leave the pawn on d4. That's one option. Or I could take on c5 and then ignore I'm definitely not taking on d5. That's a terrible idea. So if c5, the question is whether to take on c5 or leave all the tension. If I leave all the tension and play something like bishop e2, my opponent can take on d4. I take back. I don't know exactly how to assess the resulting position. It looks pretty balanced. If the center gets liquidated, you start getting a drawish type of exchange-heavy game. I'm really out of shape. I'm not sure how evident that is from the commentary. Not as evident as I expected it to be. I haven't really run into any calculation yet. That's probably where the whole house is going to fall apart. We'll get there. My opponent's on 17 minutes to my 22, so I'm storing up a bit of an edge in time that I will probably need later if this game lasts longer than 20 moves. Again, as I stated initially, my goal is to last longer than 20 moves. Not sure what else to say. What could my opponent do other than c5? He could play knight d7 or c6. I already said c6 I think is way too passive. I don't see the point of a move like rook e8 or h6. Those just seem superfluous and a waste of time. So knight d7 and c5 seem like the only reasonable moves to me. Maybe b6. But I'm not sure that b6 is something you really want to be doing yet, because there are situations in which that bishop could be going to d7 instead of b7. b6, I guess it's a move. I guess that bishop is almost always going to b7. What are my next moves going to be? Let's say my opponent doesn't challenge the center with c5 and instead plays something like knight d7. I'm probably going to be playing bishop e2, knight c3, and castling. Another thing I could do is play knight d2, knight b to d2. Okay, so your c5 is anticipated. Again, I do not want to take on d5. The question is whether to take on c5. If I do take on c5, I could follow it up with knight c3, threatening to leave my opponent with an isolated pawn. But I do want to prepare to castle, and knight c3 does not do that. So that might not be the greatest idea to play that before moving the bishop on f1. If I play bishop d3 now, that's an option. I would have to recapture on d4 with the knight. I don't want that isolated pawn. And my opponent will just... If I play bishop d3 now, my opponent just follows up with knight c6, and then he's threatening to take on d4, and I can't take back with a knight because of e5. So that just looks bad. I don't want to play e4. Sorry, I don't know why I said e4. I don't want to play bishop d3 for that reason. Do I want to play knight c3 is the question. So I think I just gave some incoherent analysis just now. If I play bishop d3 and my opponent goes knight c6, that's not threatening to leave me with an isolated pawn. It is. No, it is threatening to leave me with an isolated pawn because after bishop d3, knight c6, if I do nothing, my opponent will take on d4. We'll just take on d4 twice. And then take on c4. Bishop e2. Just get ready to castle. Or should I play knight c3 and threaten to, again, create that isolated pawn? I don't really see the danger in not castling. Like I don't see what's going to happen to me if I don't castle right away. At knight c3 leaves my opponent with a choice. He can take on d4, in which case I recapture with the knight. Then if he plays knight d7 or something, he's threatening e5. That's really rather annoying. I normally would not spend this long on move 6, on move 7 in a game with this time control, but my opponent is spending so much time, I guess I'm just following suit. But, let's go with knight c3 here, put pressure on the center. And see if my opponent decides to liquidate or keep the tension. Who knows if this is right. Well, I'm too out of practice to give a rational answer to that question. So, just using good old heuristics and vague impressions, I guess. So what are Black's options? Black can take on d4, he can take on c4, he can play knight c6, knight d7. That looks like... Knight d7 doesn't look like such a great move because of the isolated pawn. So knight c6 and the two captures are pretty much the only reasonable moves I can see here. The capture on c4 doesn't look that reasonable. Neither does the capture on d4, though. I don't think either of them is a good idea for either of us, so I think knight c6 probably is the best move here. It does allow me to create an isolated pawn, though, doesn't it? If I take on d5 and then take on c5, or let's say I take on c5 first, and then take on d5 several times. Am I not creating an isolated pawn there? That would be a problem for my opponent. So he may have to make one of the pawn captures right now. He's at 13 minutes to 18. It is a little absurd how much time has been spent. We're on move 7. He's spent half his time. I've spent a third of my time. This would never happen. I would never spend this much time in a real tournament game this early in the game. But since my opponent is spending so much time, I guess I can spend some more than I usually would. There is that 10-second increment. That'll help out near the end. But still, I mean, with only 12 minutes of thinking time, 12 and change on move 7, you're really setting yourself up to have to race through a bunch of moves later in the game when you're making the most critical positional decisions, or having to calculate. You're going to have to do that with a few minutes on your clock, which is not a recipe for success in general. But we'll see if that even occurs. Maybe I'll just blunder a piece on move 16. A distinct possibility of that. Sorry if I just moved away from the mic. I just got harder to hear for a second. I turned around. So yeah, as I said, my assessment is that if black does not want an isolated pawn, I think he has to make one of the pawn captures right now. Because otherwise he's getting that isolated pawn. Which might not be that bad. I mean, it'll be a typical IQP type of thing, but just as a pretty solid risk-averse player in general, I don't like to assume isolated pawns because you have to, make up for it with active piece play, and active piece play is not really my strength. I prefer to, have exactly symmetrical pawn structures, trade all the pieces, and agree a draw on move 20. That's my my specialty. Okay, my opponent plays knight c6, so if I take on c5, he could take on c4, I guess. That looks very suspicious, though. I mean, maybe it's not that suspicious. No, it's really not that suspicious. I could play bishop d6. No, taking on c4 cannot be good. So if I take on c5, he recaptures. I take on d5, he recaptures. Now he has an isolated pawn. Let's say he takes with e-pawn, which is probably what he should do. When you have an isolated pawn, you want to keep minors on the board. So he's got that isolated pawn, and I'm 2 moves away from castling. And when I play bishop e2, he immediately goes d4, is the problem. And he's getting rid of the isolated pawn. So it's probably not such a great idea for me to go into that line, unless I blockade the pawn somehow. So if I were to take c5, take d5, and then I'm not sure how I blockade the pawn. I could play knight d4, but then he gives me an isolated pawn right back. Yeah, that's not such a great. It's not such a great situation. I could play knight e2, but then I have a really hard. I'm just going to contortions there, and I'm just delaying development further. That just doesn't look like a principled way to play. So maybe I don't take anything, or maybe I take on c because I don't want to. I don't want to get an isolated pawn myself. So maybe I take. Hmm. Maybe I take c5 and then play bishop e2. So then d4 still happens. That's the problem. How about this? Maybe I take d5 and not c5. Okay, if I go cd5, ed5, then bishop e2. That's good. But problem is, what if I take d5 and he takes with knight? Then I have to take with knight. He takes with queen. Then I play bishop e2. He takes on d4, and I get an isolated pawn. Maybe after he takes with queen, I can just take c5, but then, I'm liquidating everything. Maybe we should just make a draw. At least I wouldn't lose. I could also take d5, and when he takes back with knight, retreat to h2. Doesn't seem like a terribly good idea, though, because then he could take twice on d4, and I'd be left with an isolated pawn, and then take c3, and I'd be left with an... He could take once on d4, and I would recapture with knight. Then he could take c3, and I'd end up with an isolated pawn on c3, which would not be good. I don't know. I gotta take one of them. I don't want to. I don't want to end up with this isolated pawn. Maybe I don't care. Maybe I play bishop e2, take c4, takes, take d4, takes. And wait, hold on. I play bishop e2, take c4, take back, take. I take with pawn. cd4, ed4. So dc4. I'm not being very coherent with expressing my thoughts here. I'm not used to it. dc4, bishop c4. cd4, ed4, and then if he makes a developing move like bishop d7, I push d5. And after bishop e2, I'm also ready to castle, so I think that sounds like a good idea. So what are my opponent's options here? He could, number one, he could try to develop the bishop on c8, so he could either play bishop d7, which does not look like a good idea, or he could play b6. Which, I don't know, it looks a little shady to me, but I guess there's no other way to develop that bishop. He could do that, or he could take c4 or take d4. That would be one of the options which tries to saddle me with an isolated pawn. And we'll see how that goes. If cd4, I take with the pawn. And then whenever he takes on c4, I hope to be able to push d5 right after, because I have 3 pieces on it. If he takes d4 and I take with the knight,
then he could take on c4 and then take twice on d4. But then I would be able to. He can't play bishop b7, so I would be able to play d5 next and take my isolated pawn off the board. So I'm not really worried about that isolated pawn very much. My opponent's below 10 minutes. I'm at 13, so the gap is closing. I'll try to let it widen a little more. I don't think I really needed to use as much time as I have been. Again, we're on move 8. I've used half my time. My opponent's used over 60% of his time, which is ridiculous use of time. In a time control like this, on move 8, in a sort of quiet position like this, you should have used no more than 20% of your time. When I said quiet, I was the reason I hesitated so long was I was looking for another word. Placid is what I was looking for. Anyway, whatever the case, my opponent's now at 8 and change, so he's taking on c4. All right. So, what could I do here? I could take on c5. That would be weird. I could take on c4. Then he would take on d4. I would take with a knight. Taking on c5 looks too goofy. I'm going to take on c4. That's got to be the way to go. So if he takes d4, I take with a knight. Then there's no e5 stuff because I take on c6 and his position just turns into a disaster. The good thing here about this position is I have played knight c3. My rook on a1's defending my queen. If the d file opens up, things are fine for me. Okay, he's doing this, so I'm going for taking that with the knight. Again, if knight takes, if all the pieces get traded off, my hope is that I'm getting in d5 right away because bishop b7 is not possible. So I've got 2 pieces on d5. He's got 2 pieces defending it. He can't he can defend it with a 3rd piece, the rook. It's a little problematic. So the line I'm on now is knight d4, queen d4, queen d4, e d4, rook d8. I could then play rook d1. That's not really where I want that rook. I would rather have that rook on c1 and the other one on d1, but don't have that luxury. I'm not castled yet. Then, in order to stop me from playing d5, he would then have to play knight d5, in which case I'm getting rid of the isolated pawn or not getting rid of it, but I'm giving him one too. So the pawn structure will be symmetrical. So we're trading everything on d4. Rook d8 we're going to see. Rook d1. And it's possible bishop d4 will follow. But I'll then play, I'll then castle. Did I say bishop d4? I meant bishop b4. So rook d8, rook d1, bishop b4, I castle. If he takes on c3, I take back, and then I'm supporting the pawn. Still problematic for me, though, because that he can take my knight out of commission, so I can never play d5 because he can take the knight. And then take on d5. This is, yeah, see, this is the kind of out-of-practice thing I was talking about. I thought, oh yeah, I'll be able to play d5 on the next move, but it turns out I'm actually not going to get to play it. Doesn't look like. So I'm going to be stuck with trying to defend this pawn and hope for a draw. Well, I got 8 more moves to last to fulfill my goal, so looks like I can probably do that. And maybe my opponent will make some errors when he gets down on the clock. Crap on the phone screen. That's what we're hoping for here. Kind of time trouble. In a position like this, it's not clear what kind of calculation is going to end up being necessary, so opportunities for blunders will likely be scant. Checking emails. Opponent's at 12 minutes. Not 12. He's at 6 minutes. I'm at 13. Alright, he plays bishop b4 now. So, what options do I have? Well, right now I have the option to play a3 and force him to take. That's a possibility. a3, force him to take. Then something like knight e4 gets played, and then c3 is hit. I have to defend it with rook c1. Not liking the position that gets me into. I could also castle now. If I castle now, he plays rook d8, I play rook d1. And then I could play a3 later. That's what I think I'm going to do. Probably playing too fast, but what can you do? I mean, this is probably not a debilitating positional defect for me. I'm probably still holding a draw here, but it's just made it harder for myself than I should have, especially as white. Being at a disadvantage on move 12 is never fun. But it's what happens when you're out of practice. It's also what happens when you play the London system, which for some reason I played all the way up to 2100, even though nobody else could figure out why I was doing it. It's because I'm too lazy to learn opening theory. That's really the reason. I learned opening theory as black, but never as white. Never an ounce of it. Other than what I picked up from just playing tournament games and screwing up, or my opponent screwing up. As black, I learned some opening theory, not by any means an extensive amount. I played the Scandinavian. I liked its solidity. Queen d8 Scandinavian, no less. I'm a very interesting player. Is probably evident at this point. My opponent's under 5 minutes, so this is the point at which in a tournament game he would no longer be required to take notation. 13 minutes. So what's he considering? What are my opponent's options? He could play bishop c3. That seems premature because if I play a3, he's gonna if he plays bishop c3 now, then he's letting me basically gain a tempo by not having to play that move. He could also play b6, get ready to develop the bishop. He could also play rook d8. Any of these moves would be in character. b6, rook d8. Those look like the only reasonable moves to me. Don't really see what else you're doing on this board. He's probably deliberating between the two of those. Bishop d7. That's very odd. Yeah, that's not what I would expect to see. I guess he's preparing for a rook c8, and then some kind of pressure on my pawn on c3. Yeah, it's not really that odd, come to think of it. So what if I play d5 now, though? If I play d5 now, bishop c3, and then I take on e6, and then he takes on b2, that's a disaster. I can't do that. Okay, if I move the knight, then I'm basically giving up on the d5 square. He could just play bishop c6, and then I'm stuck with the isolated pawn, basically. If I play a3, I just lose material. If I play bishop e5 or bishop g5, I get hit with the same takes on c3 and then rook c8. I could, I suppose, play bishop b3. c1. If I play rook c1, bishop c6, I could go a3 and at least get the bishop pair. I think that looks good. I'm not going to give my opponent too much time to think. I don't think I'm finding anything better than this. Basically, the idea of rook c1 is I'm going to play a3 and force my opponent to take on c3. I take back with the pawn, retreat to b3, and then I could try to put a rook on d1 and push c4, d5, something like that. It's a vague long-term plan. If my opponent's bishop goes to c6, and then a rook gets on d8, I'm never getting d5 in, but hopefully I can hold the fort in terms of c3 defending d4. If my opponent retreats his bishop, then I'm going to get in d5. I mean, maybe not if he plays bishop c6. If he plays bishop c6 right now, a3, he retreats his bishop, then I still can't play d5. Okay, yeah. So a3, if takes, I take with pawn. And I have the bishop pair. If I play rook d1, he goes rook d8. I could then, I suppose, play bishop g5. Let's try this. I'm going to end up playing rook d1 anyway to defend my pawn on d4. So let's see what he's doing. If he's taking on c3, he should not take on c3 voluntarily. He should probably play rook f to d8 right now. But then this bishop g5 move. I'm just trying to do whatever I can to be able to advance d5 and get rid of that isolated pawn. I'm also going to try to keep my opponent pressed for time. He's now under 3 minutes. Obviously not to the extent that I make unforced errors, but just try and not unnecessarily use time here. I don't see anything being played other than rook d8. Oh, rook c8. Okay, that threatens discovered attacks on my bishop on c4, so it forces me to retreat. Right? Yeah. Can I play d5? d5 takes. d5, e d5, knight d5, knight d5, bishop d5, rook c8, rook c8, rook d5. If d5 and he takes on c3, I can take c6. And then I just win, right? I take c6. If he wants to not lose immediately. He takes b2, then I take b7. Material's equal at that point. If he takes c1, I take with bishop, and I'm okay. Not sure my calculations are correct here. Not by any means. I'm going to put this rash plan into action regardless. So he was anticipating that, I guess. Or else how would I have gotten such a quick response? Okay, so knight takes d5 now. I think my calculations are all still working out. Yeah, still working out. No egregious error so far. So, I have two options here. I could take on c8 or I could take on d5. If I take on c8, that just looks like bad news. Because then he gets to the second rank and I can't play rook d2. Oh no, he can't get to the second rank because I'll just win. So I think I should take on c8 here. Yeah, I should take on c8. And then do this. Because there's no rook c2 because I win with rook d8 and bishop d6. So my opponent's rook has to stay on the back rank, and the position is now just equal. So, as white, I've achieved my goal of equalizing the position by move 20 after being worse on move 12. So I have lasted 20 moves at this point. I got 7 minutes, my opponent's got 2, and this is likely going to end in a draw. I don't know. If my opponent sends me a draw offer, I'll take it. I might actually my position is better. I would not take a draw offer. I'd take that back. My position is better because I'm going to get to the 7th rank first. So I'm going to keep playing this and see if I can press an advantage. My opponent should hold it, obviously. Because he can also get to the 2nd rank. He can also defend from, rook c6 to b6, something like that. But he's also got a... I almost just made an accidental pre-move there. Okay, so h6 is played. But the problem is, can I just play rook b5 and win a pawn right away? Rook b5, rook c4. Aha. That's the strategy. Rook b5, rook c4, I can play bishop e5. And then he just plays b6. Okay, that doesn't work. All right, what about rook d7? Rook d7 should work, right? Rook d7, rook c2, I take, he takes. Rook d7's got to be right. I've got c1 covered. Yeah, rook d7. He's losing a pawn. He cannot avoid the loss of a pawn here. Because, you can't defend b7 with your rook. If you move b7, I take a7. If you go rook c2 to counterattack, I take b7. You take b2, and then I take a7. And I'm just a pawn up. And there's no kind of fork tricks happening on my king with some back rank check, because my king always goes to h2, and then this bishop is watching that diagonal, on which my king is then exposed. So I'm just winning a pawn. Whether it's enough, I don't know. I was just thinking about rook b7, rook b2, and then bishop d6, which would instantly lose the house after rook b1 check, and then bishop takes d6 is check. Let's not do that. What I could do, though, is play bishop e5. Or I could just take b7 and a7 like I intended to do. Or I could play a3. But that just allows him to play bishop c5 for free, so I don't think that's a good idea. Alright, let's do it.
He could play bishop c5 now, but I have bishop g3 defending the f2 point, and then b2 will be defended by my rook, so I'm still winning a pawn in that case. I still will be up a pawn. So the question here is, after rook b2, rook a7, is the extra pawn on the a file enough to win? Probably not. I mean, it's not like it's opposite colored bishops and it's a clear draw, but I don't think that is... I don't have experience in this type of position exactly, but from my hunch is that it should still be a draw. But it might be tricky to defend, especially with my opponent's rapidly dwindling minute and 23 seconds clock. Okay, taking a7 looks like the move. There's no sneak attack like rook takes f2 because I would take, and then on bishop c5 I have bishop e3, and my opponent loses. So no fancy stuff can happen. Rook b1 check, I go king h2 again. Bishop g3, I shore everything up. So I'm just up a clean pawn here. If bishop c5, obviously I have a check on a8. So we're seeing that now. I have a check on a8 followed by bishop to g3, defending. So how do you play this position for a win? Actually, my opponent could check on b1 and then play rook f2, which is problematic. That is not rook f1, not rook f2, rook f1. Yeah, that's an issue, isn't it? Yeah, that's an issue. It is an issue. Yeah, it looks like this is just going to be drawn because I can't really defend that pawn. If I play f3, of course, bishop g1 is perpetual check. Yeah, so it looks like it's just a draw. There's no rook a5 and then rook f5 pin stuff because bishop takes g3 will be check. I can play rook a4 and rook f4, but then my opponent will just trade. So yeah, it's a draw. Yeah, again, this is another basic tactic, two-move tactic I overlooked. So it's not like it made me lose, but it draws the game instantly. So this is the kind of thing you miss when you're rusty, even when you're 2100. Yeah, there's nothing you can do here. Just gonna do that. I could try to keep the bishops on the board, but it's really useless. So we'll just play this out to the draw. I don't know, if my opponent wants to offer a draw, I'll take it. But since this is supposed to be instructional, I will demonstrate how the draw works. Basically, I just sit around. Neither side can do anything. If my opponent goes over with his king to try to win the pawn, then I go kill the pawns on the king side, and I'll take a draw here. All right, there you have it. 34 moves. That took an hour to play. Very, very, very leisurely. Am I interested in a post-mortem? I'm not sure what the structure of that would be.
I was going to run through the game quickly, just on my video, but I'm not sure what he means by postmortem. Does he mean like in the chat, or does he mean getting together on Twitch or something? He stopped the video. Okay. Well, I guess if he stopped his video, I should stop my video. I'll do a quick rundown of the game, like a very quick rundown of the game. It was a London system. We have this pawn tension in the center between the C and D pawns. Neither of us wanted to take. Eventually, I allowed him to give me an isolated pawn, falsely thinking that I could get rid of it by playing D5. But he ends up with this pin. Takes out one of my defenders for this D5 advance, so I end up not being able to get in D5. Then the game turns into a battle over the D5 square. Eventually, he lets me advance D5. He should have played here rook to D8 and shored up this square more, but he didn't, allowing me to trade everything on D5. Then I was better. I won a pawn. But then this bishop g3 move, I don't know. There's probably not something better. Bishop e3, I guess. But then he would play rook e2, force me to play some passive defense like rook a3, defending the pawns on a2 and e3, and that would just be drawn. All rook endings are drawn. So this is already a draw at this point. But yeah, it's becomes clear after he wins the pawn on f2, and then this position is just a clear draw. Nothing's ever going to happen. Basically, if black tries to walk his king over to win this pawn, then I'll bring my rook over here, and he's in danger of losing. And otherwise, we're just going to shuffle the kings around. There's nothing pawns can shuffle too, but nothing of substance is going to happen here. So yeah, pretty evenly matched game with errors on both sides. Neither of us is really playing grandmaster strength here. Yeah, not the most interesting game ever played, but not to say that's not typical of all my games. Yep, so thanks to DrHack for playing this game, and I'm going to try and get this up on YouTube. It's been 4 years since I've uploaded a YouTube video, so if you're watching this on YouTube right now, then I've had a historic success in technology. Yep, thanks for watching.